Hello, this is Jared from Commit Quality, and in this video we're going to go over the cypress.config.js file. All configuration is done inside this file. This was actually updated during Cypress 10. The previous version of this, which you might see in a lot of old Cypress videos, was a cypress.json file, but they've gone away from these and they've just created cypress.config.js, or TS if you're using TypeScript. When we look at this was all scaffolded for us. This is what Cypress created when we run through our kind of installation. And it doesn't matter too much if you understand what's going on here. But basically, you don't actually need this defined config. All this does, it offers us intelligent kind of code completion. Like I say, it's not essential, but it is considered best practice, just because it's going to make your life a lot easier when you're adding your configuration values to here. Now, it's also split between end-to-end and component configs. So I could have a component configuration inside here as well, which would only apply to component testing tests. However, we've only set up end-to-end at the moment, so that's what we're going to focus on today. Before I start adding to the config as well, I just want to touch on the setup node events. So if you're familiar with Cypress versions lower than 10, you might not exactly know what this is, but you'll understand why it's here now. So the setup node events function allows you to tap into, modify, or extend the internal behavior of Cypress. This function was added in Cypress version 10 to replace the plugins file that used to be generated on older versions of Cypress. So for example, you could use this to kind of seed a database with test data. Before we jump in, I want to talk about the documentation. So this video, we're going to go over some of the core kind of properties you can have in the config file. However, we're not covering everything because that would just take too long. So what I do want to show you is the configuration documentation. And in here, it gives you a bunch of information. It's laid out really easy and neatly to see properties you can set. I want to touch on that you've got a global section, which will apply to everything. But then you also have these kind of end-to-end and component sections. Here you've got your testing type specific options. So we've got things that can only go into end-to-end and others that can only go into component testing. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Like I said, we're not going to look at component today. That will come in a future video. But what you're going to see is when I start adding to the config file, you're going to notice that some I'm going to be putting into the end-to-end sections and others I'm going to put into the global section. Let's kick this off. I'm going to say we've got these example files generated here, the example tests. Now what I want to do is I want to actually keep these because I want to refer to these in my project, but I don't want these to be showing when I'm trying to run my tests. I don't want to execute them because they're just examples and they have nothing really to do with the application I'm going to eventually test. So I'm going to open up Cypress using npx cypress open. I'm going to click into my end-to-end testing, which has already been configured for us. Start end-to-end testing in Electron, and this will open this. So let me minimize that one. Okay, so one thing to note is when you make changes in Cypress and you save, your UI will update alongside it. So that's really good that the Cypress tool actually updates as you're making these changes. So what I want to do is I want to get rid of these folders inside end-to-end, just so I can create my own test file and start running only that code. But I want to keep this locally so I can refer back to it. How do we do this? So let's go back to our configuration, and inside end-to-end, I'm going to add a new property. And this property is going to be called exclude spec pattern. And straight away, what you can see is I've got this kind of intelligent code completion. So I can actually hit tab on this. And now I can enter what I need to get rid of those tests. So if I hover over exclude spec pattern, it'll tell us what we can do. We can do a string or an array. So I can say just remove one item, or I can have an array of multiple locations that I want to remove. Let's have a look inside here. We've got one getting started and two advanced examples. I'm going to say Cypress E2E, and I'm actually going to copy this just so I don't have any typos. There. So if I hit save on this and I go back to the UI, what we should see is it's updated and it's removed the one getting started. You can see now I've only got the two advanced examples. So how do I get rid of this one? Well, I can add it to the array. So I'm going to convert this into an array, and I'm now going to say do exactly the same, but instead of one getting started, we're going to say I want to get rid of two advanced examples. So once again, I'm going to copy this and save it here. Oh, didn't copy. Try that again. Awesome. So two advanced examples. And if I go back into the Cypress UI, we can now see create your first spec. But actually in Visual Studio Code, we can still see our tests. We still look at them for kind of examples and help us when we want to do different things with our tests. But in our actual runner, we don't see any anymore. Now, I said there's specific things that have to go in end-to-end, specific things in component. So I just want to show you a quick example of what happens if I cut this out and just put it in the kind of global config section. So let's save that. When I click save now, if I open up my playground, great. So what comes up is the exclude spec pattern configuration option is now invalid when set from the root of the config object. So it gives you exactly what's wrong, and it actually suggests where you should put this, with say in end-to-end or in your component. So it gives you these really nice error messages if you do put something in the wrong place. So let's just undo that and save it, and that should put everything back to normal for us. Let's go back to the Cypress UI, try again. Awesome. So we're back to our original state where we don't have any tests that should be included as part of the test run. I'm just going to add a new file in here just so we can start playing around with some of the config values I want to go through. So we'll name this maybe example.sci.js. I'm just going to add some into this now. So I'm going to say, here's my first test. I will just name it hello. Oh, need to add string. Hello world. Let's create our arrow function inside here so we can start actually doing something. Brilliant. So I'm not going to put anything in here for now. That's just going to be our basic hello. Wow, my typing's really off. Hello world test. What I want to do is I want to set a base URL that can be used across all of my tests, and I can kind of append onto it or just call it originally. How do I do that? Let's go back into the Cypress config file, and we can start adding our base URL. This is going to live inside the E2E project again. So down here, I'm going to say base URL. And once again, it's auto filled in for us with this IntelliSense. And I'm just going to say, let's go to, say, Google. Let's do www.google.com. Great. With that base URL added, I can now say sci.visit, which is a command that comes directly from Cypress. And I can say open up the string and add /, which will actually say go to google.com. Now, if I wanted to say go to the help page, I could just do this, and this would actually take us to google.com/help, because it's taken that base URL value from here. In this example, Google is okay for me. So I'm going to save this and open up the Cypress UI again. You can see we've got our example test. So I'm going to click this to run it. And what we should see is it takes us directly to Google. Brilliant. So this is how you can change it, and you can share that base URL across all of your tests coming from the config value. While we're in here, what I can show you as well is how you can change the viewport height and width. So if you look up the top, you can see this is showing our viewport, and it's saying by default it's 1000 by 660. Now we can change this to whatever you want. So if you want to emulate certain kind of device sizes, you can do that, and it's really simple. So let's jump back into the config file, and we'll change this to some different value. So this will be part of the config. So here I'm going to say viewport, and they've already got it, the height. I probably want to add it on a new line, otherwise that'll be very messy. And I can just say whatever I want it to be. So let's just say 500, and then I want to do the same for the width. So I'll say viewport width, and we'll call that 500 as well. I'm going to save this, and of course gotta add the comma, otherwise it's going to kick off down here when we've got our end-to-end section. Let's go back to the actual test. And what we should see now is when we go to run our test, that the viewport changes to 500 by 500. Great, so there it is, taking us back to Google. All is working perfectly fine. The next thing I want to touch on is timeouts, and these are extremely important with Playwright, because we want to be able to set our kind of weight values. Sometimes you might want to make it higher, sometimes lower, or you just want a default value for, maybe waiting on things like DOM actions. Now we can do this in the config file. We can also do it locally, which I'm going to touch on at the end of this video. So keep watching to see how you can change it dynamically per test / per test file. So let's go back to the Cypress config file. And first of all, I want to show you the default values before I change anything. I'm going to expand my test a little bit. And we know we're on the Google web page. And let's say we want to click the cookies accept button. So I'm going to say button.contains, and then the text, which I think off the top of my head is accept all. Like this, and let's put that like that. Great. This needs to be in double quotes because it's inside singles. So we got that, and we just want to say .click to click the actual button. And let's just check that works first of all. I'm going to open up the test again. So we've gone to site visit, and we've clicked it, and we've got rid of the cookies. Brilliant, we have this. Now what I want to do is I'm going to change this to accept all S. With the case of it's not going to find a button with that text, or if it does, Google might have a bug. We click on this, and it's now trying to wait. It's trying to search for a button that contains the text of accept all S. And what we can see is timed out retrying after 4,000 milliseconds or 4 seconds. It tells you why it's timed out, that it expected to find this type of element, but it's not there. And we know that's the case. How is this 4 seconds? How is it 4,000 milliseconds? And when I touched on the start of the video, it's some things are set by default, and you can see these by going into settings. So if I go down here and I click on project settings, what we can see is a bunch of default values that we've got in our kind of resolved configuration. Now the layout of this is really neat as well. So everything kind of just there as normal is the default values, but then it'll highlight, the changes you made in your config.js file, shows you kind of the environment variables you've set, the CLI and dynamic ones as well, which is set up by the new plugins way of doing the node events. But here you can just look through and see exactly what you're changing. And right here, you've got this default command timeout of 4,000. Which is that 4 seconds, which is just waiting for something to be actionable inside your DOM. So what I can actually do is I can copy this, and let's go into our config file, and let's add this in, default command timeout, and let's just change it to 2,000 milliseconds, just to see it being different. I'm going to go back into the UI. Just gotta wait for that to refresh, and now you can see the default command timeout's actually changed to 2000, but it's also highlighted in the blue, which we know by looking at this key over here is what we have set from our config file. So if I go back into specs and I run this, what we're going to see now is it's not going to say the 4,000 milliseconds anymore. It's going to say it waited 2,000 or that 2 seconds, and that's a way of how you can change that default value just globally for all of your tests. And like I've said, we can actually change these locally as part of test files or your specific test declaration. I'm going to touch on that in a little second. Just before I do, I want to talk about retries as well. So we can also say when we want things to be retried or not. So up here, if I'd say retries, and we can see the IntelliSense down here, I'm going to say for open mode, which is when we open up Cypress manually here, I want it to retry 2 times. And maybe for run mode, which is when you run in via command line, maybe just do it once. You can set these to whatever you want. And of course, add your comma so it doesn't break anything. Let's save that and go back to our test. We know it's going to fail because I've changed the button, but it's actually going to retry it for us that 2 times that we said in our configuration file. So we had our first one, and that's our. So here's our first initial one, and then this is retry number 1 and retry number 2. And in all cases, it's given us the same error message because we know there's no button with this kind of text. Great. So I'm going to actually close this now because I just touched on run mode or running via CLI, and we haven't actually gone through this yet, so this is going to be a good time to talk about it. Now I'm going to do another video in more depth about running via the command line. However, just like we've run Cypress in open mode with the Cypress app and the UI available, we can also say npx cypress run. I'm going to add a flag for headed so we can see it pop up. But if I click enter on this, we are running in run mode, which is what you're going to run on your kind of CI environments. And by default in run mode, it'll run them. It's going to take the retries here, so it should only do 1 retry attempt, unlike when we had it in open mode where we run 2. But also, it should record a video for us as well. So you can see here, it's just popped up a videos folder where it's actually going to, because it's going to fail on my other screen, if I drag it over, we can see that it's popped up, it's running an Electron, it's still taking all the values we have set. Nothing is different apart from you're not opening the Cypress app, you're actually just running it via command line and then it's opening it up for you. Just trying to find that button, didn't find it, and now it's attempting number 2, which of course is retry number 1. Awesome. So we saw that failed and it's actually recorded those videos for us. Now, like I said, I'm not going to touch on everything in the config values, but you can say when you want this to happen. You can turn it off or you can say what location you want it to go. By default, Cypress assumes you'd want a folder for videos. However, you can change that at any point in time in the config file. And just to show this, if I look in here and I just search for video, you can see here videos folder. This is the path to where the videos will be saved. So you can this is all configurable and you can change this inside the config itself. Okay, so all that's finished and you can see here that it's failed. We had 1 test run and 1 test failed. And inside videos now it's created this example.sci.js MP4. The last thing I want to show you then is how we change these values locally. So we've kind of touched upon how we do it globally for all of our test files. So these will apply to every test we have inside the end-to-end folder. But now what if I want to change these values for a specific test or a specific test file which has a bunch of tests inside them? Well, we can do this and it's quite easy. The first one I'm going to show you is doing it to a specific file. So if we had multiple tests in this, it'd apply to them. And it's quite simple. We just say cypress.config, and then we pass through whatever we want. So I'm going to say default command timeout because we've kind of been using this one. So default command timeout, and I'm going to set this to now 1 second instead of 2 seconds. By default, it'd be 4, but in our global, we set it to 2. But now what we're saying is as we dig into this one file, I only want it to be 1 second. So this 1 second only applies to the tests inside this file. It wouldn't apply to if we had multiple test files. That would take the default value from your config file. So I'm going to save this and I want to do the Cypress open again so we can see it easier. We've got our example. So now what we should see is when we try and do this, well, not assertion, but essentially try to find the locator on the page, it should only take that 1 second, and it should tell us here, timed out after 1 second. And we know the reason is because that's what we've set specifically in the test file here. So what if I want to do something similar, but I want to do it directly inside a given test and not for all of the tests in the file? What you can do is you can actually pass configuration to your block or your test declaration. And to do this, you just have to say, after the comma here, we're going to say, let's add some configuration. So I can actually say default command timeout, and I'm going to put it to 5 seconds now. So it's going to take a little bit longer. And it doesn't like it because I have to add the comma here. Great. So let's try that. Let's go back to our application. It's now running and it should wait that 5 seconds. So waited 5 seconds for that specific. And you can add more to this as well. So what if let's just comment out this assertion. What if we wanted to change the base URL in this specific test? Well, you just do it here. You can say base URL and set it to wherever you want. So should we say, let's do Amazon. Everyone loves Amazon. www.amazon.co.uk. Add the comma. Save it, and now what we should see, even though in the global config our base URL was Google, this one should now take us to amazon.co.uk. Awesome. There we are. It's popped up and it's waiting for everything to load before it actually finishes the test. So this is where I talked about when we kind of had our introduction to Playwright. It's automatically waiting for the web page to load, everything to finish. It normally is a lot quicker than this, but my machine is very slow. So you should have this loaded up instantly. Brilliant. So that's everything I wanted to show you. How you can set your global values, where to find the default ones via the Cypress UI, how you override them locally as well via the overriding the test declaration config or using the Cypress config command that we just saw. Just touch again as well is we haven't gone through everything. There's still lots you can look at. I really suggest looking at the Cypress documentation because it's going to give you so much information. A lot of this is going to be covered off in future videos as well, so it might not be covered directly in this configuration video. However, I will be covering, how you do different things by adding to the config. As always, if you have any comments or anything that you really want to know about, let me know and I'll try to kind of push those videos forward. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.